Okay, so this is the revision slides for global tourism. For this particular one, we're working along the lines of a mind map. Please remember this is in a supplement to your notes and your textbook. This alone is sketchy, and all your examples and everything else is within the notes and the textbook. So this is the scaffold for you for your revision. Okay, so this set of revision notes is for the Sec 4E and 4N, as well as the 5N students who are covering global tourism as one of their topics in the exams. It's useful from mid-year exam onwards to prelims, as well as the actual exam itself. So this topic of global tourism is divided into 5 subsections, starting from general definitions to groups that promote tourism. Then we will look at trends in global tourism, reasons for the growth in global tourism, positive impacts of tourism, as well as lastly negative impacts of tourism. So for general definitions, what are the core ones? The main definition that you need to know is basically who are tourists. Okay, that allows you to identify very clearly and segment out who are the group of people that we are dealing with. The second general definition type comes under the different destination types, where you have your 5 main destination types: rich culture, scenic beauty, good facilities, conflict, and conflict. Okay, ignore space. Space has been taken out of your syllabus. So case examples under rich culture include pilgrimage, where people make the trip to Mecca, to Jerusalem in Israel, or heritage, where people visit places like the Great Wall of China, or they go to Machu Picchu, or film-induced, where they visit the Lord of the Rings film site in New Zealand, or Avatar Mountain in China. Under scenic beauty, you have honeypot tourism, which is a key form of anchor for mass tourism that ties into scenic beauty. Case example in your book lists the Grand Canyon. Please remember, honeypot tourism, according to the definition in your textbook, is only for scenic beauty locations. Mass tourism, tour guides, tour buses, facilities built to support this large number of tourists. Under good facilities, you have MICE, medical tourism, education tourism, which has been taken out, ignore that. And so let's take a look at MICE first. As mentioned earlier during the lesson itself, MICE, we talk about Singapore as a key case study, having the exhibition centres, Suntec City, Marina Bay Sands and Resort World Sentosa, as well as building all the transport networks required and all the recreational facilities required to support MICE tourism. At this moment in time, I would like to highlight once again Singapore's push for MICE tourism includes the building of the integrated resorts. The IRs are integrated resorts, they are not casinos. Having a casino in each of them is only one component of the integrated resort entertainment facilities. So USS, as well as the hotels, the retail, and the world-class restaurants are all part of these MICE facilities. Now moving on, for medical tourism, the case study that we used to analyze this would be Korea, where people go for plastic surgery. We mentioned this in class. When you talk about medical tourism, you need to think of a few factors. There was a practice exercise that we did where you were asked to compare between Bangkok and Korea and sort out 6 factors between cost, transport, facility level, as well as things like medical procedures. So please bear in mind that medical tourism, or medical tourists generally travel for 2 reasons. Either it's cheaper overseas or the tech is better. So if it's neither cheaper nor the technology is not better overseas, then you wouldn't travel, you would just do it in your own country. So when you think of Korea, you talk about things like better technology, cutting edge hospitals and procedures. The other example for medical tourism that is not listed here in this particular mind map is Thailand. Please recall back in your textbook there is a comparative table which shows you how much a heart bypass costs across different countries, and Thailand is actually one of the considered cheap and good destinations. Lastly, under good facilities, we have theme parks, theme park tourism. Example given in your textbook is Disneyland. However, we've mentioned this before, any of the theme parks, the international theme parks, will qualify as theme park tourism. Even some of the more localized ones in Korea, like Lotte World and Everland, when they are of a certain size and they draw an international crowd, it can be considered a direct form of tourism. Next up, under tourism for conflict, okay, tourism for conflict, we're looking at dark tourism, visiting your ground zero in New York, visiting Auschwitz, or even visiting a location of natural disaster like Pompeii. As long as the tourist intent is to visit the location where great pain and anguish has occurred, which tourist group tend to go for these places. The next branch that we're looking at are groups that promote tourism. So we have the government, the media, international organizations, as well as travel writers. These four groups, because it's four factors, it can very easily come out as an open-ended question. So you need to be able to compare two or more of these groups as in their effectiveness in terms of promoting tourism. Now, as we mentioned many times in class when we were dealing with this topic for the first time, if you look at the four groups, right, the one that is distinctively strongest is the government, because the government is in control of entry and exit to the country. Therefore, if the government is willing to take an anti-tourist stance, basically can freeze out tourism completely. This is important because you cannot argue otherwise using the other three factors. Now, the other three factors have a strong impact in terms of promoting, and in the case of international organizations like the World Health Organization, they have a negative impact on tourism. However, all these are mitigating factors. The government effect is the strongest. So if the government wants to have a push for tourism, they have the money, they have the ability to open up the country. The reverse is also true. Next up, let's look at the branch of trends in global tourism. So under this area, we are looking at international tourism, domestic tourism, and increasingly the growth of niche tourism. Okay, so international tourism, the origins of the tourists and the destination of tourists have actually made a slight change. Although Europe and North America are still the dominant supplier and destinations, Southeast Asia, Asia, and the Pacific region have actually caught up increasingly as tourist destinations. The amount of tourist location coming from Asia has also increased significantly. Now, the second one is domestic tourism. Domestic tourism is dominant only in large countries. Case examples given in your textbook include countries like China and America, as well as the Philippines. Now, domestic tourism is a very economy sensitive form of tourism. Whenever you have a case where there's economic downturn or there's recession, there will be a boom in domestic tourism because a lot of the people who used to travel internationally will look for a cheaper alternative. This is evident even in a small country like Singapore, where during times of economic recession and downturn, you do see a lot more people taking up shorter holidays or even staycations. Now, the last one along this line of trends in global tourism is the growth of niche tourism. Now, for this one, right, what you're looking at is your Waitomo case study in New Zealand. So it's a form of ecotourism, minimal, not no impact, minimal impact, where it's sustainable. The local economy is fueled by this particular development, and money that's earned here goes directly back into the economy locally as well. So there's very little loss of tourist receipts. One important point about this niche tourism growth is the current quest for the unique experience by the modern tourist, where you are searching for something that is unique to you, that is specific to your interests. However, bear in mind that nobody is unique actually. So even if you are going against the trend of the norm, there's easily a sizable amount of society that's along with you. So what this means is this niche form of tourism is now gradually becoming accepted, and the size of it is significant enough that the different groups that promote tourism are now actively looking at how to capture this market. So examples include things like going to New Zealand for adventure tourism, bungee jumping, whitewater rafting, or whale watching. Okay, so these are all examples of niche tourism. Next up, reasons for growth in global tourism. Many branches. The first one being technology. So with better tech, key things to note okay, is cheaper, faster, and safer. So we talk about planes, planes that fly faster, that can carry more people. As a result, the cost of the flight goes down. More and more countries opening up their air routes. It's easier to access information with better technology, so you know of more places and you want to visit them. Demand factors is another one. Demand factors is a very, very important reason for growth in global tourism, especially when you talk about mass tourism. So with a large population in China and India developing now and having large amounts of or rather increased amount of disposable income, these people now have affluence and the leisure time to go for tours. With the development of these economies and the evolution of their work life, the amount of stress that they encounter also increases, and therefore there is this quest for stress relief through the use of tourism. So demand factors are actually the most important factors when you're considering growth of tourism. If you notice, I've highlighted this slide, I've zoomed in a little bit more because of the relative importance of this. Now, you can never argue against disposable income and increase in leisure time as the most important factors. Okay, no other factors in the promotion of tourism is more important than disposable income and increase in leisure time. I cannot say this enough times, because if you don't have the money, you cannot travel. If you have all the money in the world but you don't have time, you can't travel either. So these are the two fundamental factors or requirements that you must have before any form of tourism will take place. If you don't have either one of these, you will not travel, regardless of what other factors may be in play. Now, under fluctuations, right, you have three main areas that will lead to fluctuations: disasters, recessions, and political situations. So when you have a natural disaster, there's destruction of facilities and amenities, so humans will tend to reduce the demand for their location. When you have recessions, it affects your demand factor, your DI drops. So as a result, your demand for tourism will also fall. Finally, political situations are a man-made version of disasters. So whenever you have an insecure political situation where you have riots, protests, tourists will tend to avoid these locations for their own safety. However, you can argue that there's a small group of niche tourists who are there to experience dark tourism. So for this group, they will continue to go to these locations. Now, one of the final factors that will lead to fluctuations is, of course, disease. So when you have infectious, please note, you have to include this word, infectious and deadly diseases. Okay, for example, SARS or MERS, this will strongly discourage tourists from visiting the location because your life is not at risk. Okay, remember we talked about this in tectonics and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. Okay, nobody wants their life to be at risk, so please remember that. Okay, now we're moving on to destination factors that will affect tourism. Destination factors include things like attractions, infrastructure, access to information. Attractions include what are the things that you've built in place. It need not be theme parks alone. It can also be other attractions like shopping streets, famous eateries that have is Michelin star awarded. So these are also attractions that can attract tourists. Similarly, if you have built infrastructure, better air or seaports, better transport amenities, roads, buses, easier to get to your country and to get around your country itself, world-class hotels or even decent business class hotels, or very good safe environments for shopping, for food. These are infrastructure that can also lead to increase in tourist numbers. So far we have looked at the key definitions as well as trends in tourism and some of the factors that will affect the growth of tourism, leaving us with only two more areas, impacts, positive and negative, as well as a small section on the case study of tourism in Singapore. Let's start with the good news, positive impacts of tourism. So in the positive area, we are looking at the environment, social culture and economic, which is the same as the negative. So there's good and there's bad in all these three sections. So if you look at positive impact on the environment, right? Many a times with tourism, you money coming in, you do have conservation. Natural parks, it can also be cultural aspects that are conserved, and because the tourists want to see these things, so they travel to your country to take a look at either your cultural heritage or your natural beauty, and as a result of that, your government is less willing to destroy it or let it flow away. From a social cultural standpoint, cultural preservation, things like the example we gave was the Balinese dance. Okay, it's something that the tourists like to enjoy, like to watch. So it's a part of the traditional culture, and it has been taken out, and a lot of people are learning it because it actually earns them money. From an economic standpoint, right, the benefits include things like increased employment, jobs that are directly and indirectly related to your tourism sector. Okay, think of the Filipino fishermen who bring people out to look at the whale sharks. Then, of course, economically, there's increased earnings, but there's also loss of tourism receipts. So if the money is, a bulk of the money that's earned through tourism is lost through MNCs, then it's not all good. One last thing I would like to highlight on economic benefits is infrastructure development. So the locals are actually, as a result of this tourist infrastructure building, right, they benefit from it. So example is like the KL MRT system, which was built for tourists, but as a result, the local population living in KL get to enjoy the infrastructure as well. Now onto the negative impacts of tourism. If you look at the environment sector, with more tourists, there's more congestion, there's definitely an increase in vandalism and litter. Habitats are destroyed, and carbon footprint actually increases massively. So you think of the examples we talk about, the Chinese boy, the 17-year-old Chinese boy who went to vandalize the temple in Egypt. Yeah, these are case studies that you have to bring up, okay, when you're answering a question about negative impact. In terms of social cultural impact negatively, there's a component of dilution with labor, because what you tend to preserve are the things that the tourists want to see. They do not want to see your 5-hour-long ritual. They want to see maybe a 20-minute dance that is within that ritual. And after a while, what is preserved is only the 20-minute dance. The 5-hour ritual is lost, and people don't remember that because that doesn't bring them tourist money. So given enough time, your culture is actually only partially preserved. Crime is another big area. Remember we watched the video on the friendship band scam, okay, in Europe. That's very common. I think we watched it in action at the Roman Spanish steps. So when you have more tourists, there are a ready group of victims, so crime syndicates will tend to target, and as a result, overall crime level will increase. And with that, we have more or less covered the entire topic of global tourism. Now, please remember, global tourism has another key component. In section A, you will be tested in terms of GI for this, where you need to know sampling methods and other forms of data collection and their possible mistakes and errors that you should try to eliminate. So this is the content area. We will have a separate video for that. So in conclusion, I would like to remind you, using this very touristy photo of mine, that we are all tourists on some levels. We have engaged in tourism on some levels, and we have seen tourist destinations, whether it is a very developed one or one that's in its infancy. So we have actually got the data within our brains, within our experiences, to answer some of these questions. Now, for tourism and for all the other components of geography, it is not only about what you memorize. A large part of what we put down can be from relevant personal experiences. So if you are giving me a tourist destination that's not in your textbook, but it's a genuine tourist destination, it suits as an example for the factor that you were listing, it is fine. So hope this helps in some way. If you're not subscribed to the channel, give it a thumbs up to the video. All the best for your exams.